They said she was too emotional, too unpredictable, too much of a liability to handle the Barrett .50 caliber. But when an elite enemy sniper team had her unit pinned down and outgunned, Hannah Novak would prove that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one you need when everything falls apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Training Ground Charlie as Hannah Novak adjusted the bipod on her Barrett M82A1 for what felt like the 100th time. At 22, she stood 5'4", with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style. Her green eyes focused with an intensity that made some of her fellow soldiers uncomfortable. The massive .50 caliber rifle looked almost comically oversized in her hands, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed by the other snipers in her unit. "Easy there, Novak," called out Sergeant Viktor Petrov from the firing line next to her. "That Barrett's got more kick than you weigh. Maybe you should stick to something more your size." The comment drew chuckles from the other shooters, but Hannah kept her focus on the target 800 meters downrange. She'd heard variations of this criticism for months since arriving at the European training facility outside Prague. The Czech countryside provided perfect conditions for long-range marksmanship. Training with rolling hills and varied terrain that challenged even experienced snipers. Hannah had requested assignment here specifically because of its reputation for producing elite marksmen. What she hadn't anticipated was the constant skepticism about her ability to handle the Barrett's legendary recoil and weight ranges. "Hot," announced Rangemaster Colonel Andreas Richter, his German accent cutting through the morning air. "Commence firing when ready." Hannah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the Barrett against her shoulder. The rifle was indeed massive, nearly 30 pounds loaded, with a muzzle brake designed to tame the tremendous energy of the .50 BMG cartridge. But she'd trained with it obsessively, spending hours perfecting her form and understanding its unique characteristics. Her first shot rang out across the range, the distinctive crack of the Barrett echoing off the hillsides. Through her scope, she watched the impact marker indicate a clean hit in the target's center ring. Around her, the other shooters continued their steady rhythm, but she noticed Petrov glance over with mild surprise. "Lucky shot," muttered Corporal Hans Weber, another sniper who'd made his disdain for her presence well known. "Let's see if you can do it again without falling over." Hannah chambered another round, her movements smooth and practiced. She developed her own technique for managing the Barrett's recoil, using her body position and breathing to absorb the energy rather than fighting against it. Her smaller stature actually worked to her advantage in some ways, allowing her to get lower and more stable than larger shooters. Her second shot followed the first into the target center, then a third and fourth. By the time she'd completed her 10-round string, all impacts were clustered within a 3-inch group at 800 meters, performance that would be impressive for any sniper regardless of experience level. But instead of acknowledgement, she heard Weber whisper to another shooter, "Probably got lucky with the wind conditions." The skepticism wasn't limited to marksmanship. During tactical exercises, Hannah noticed how other team members positioned themselves. They'd give her assignments that kept her away from critical positions, as if they were protecting both the mission and her from situations they deemed too demanding. When urban assault scenarios required quick movement with heavy equipment, she was often assigned to support roles rather than primary positions. "Novak," Colonel Richter called out after the morning session, "report to my office after equipment cleaning." Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Richter was known for his direct communication style, and being called to his office usually meant either commendation or correction. Given the dynamics in her unit, she suspected it wasn't the former dot in Richter's office. Hannah stood at attention while the colonel reviewed her shooting scores from the past month. his weathered face marked by years of military service across multiple conflict zones, remained impassive as he flipped through the pages. "Your marksmanship scores are exceptional," Richter began, his tone neutral. "Consistently in the top 5% of shooters who've trained at this facility." Hannah allowed herself a moment of relief, but Richter wasn't finished. "However, there have been concerns raised about your emotional stability under pressure." The words hit like a physical blow. "Emotional stability, sir. Some of your colleagues have observed that you can be intense, overly focused to the point where it might compromise team dynamics. There's also the question of whether you can maintain performance standards when facing actual combat stress rather than range conditions." Hannah felt heat rising in her cheeks. The same dedication and focus that produced her exceptional shooting scores was being reframed as a character flaw. "Sir, I believe my performance speaks for itself. I've met or exceeded every standard required for this training program. Meeting standards on a controlled range is different from operating effectively in a combat environment," Richter replied. "The Barrett .50 caliber is typically employed in high-stress situations, where split-second decisions can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Your colleagues question whether someone with your emotional tendencies can be trusted with that responsibility." Hannah stared at a point on the wall behind Richter's desk, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What emotional tendencies, sir?" "The intensity, Novak. The way you obsess over details, over perfection. In combat, you need to be adaptable, not fixated. You need to work as part of a team, not as an individual seeking to prove something." The unfairness of it struck Hannah like a slap. Her dedication was being twisted into liability, her pursuit of excellence reframed as problematic behavior. She thought about all the hours she'd spent studying ballistics tables, learning to read wind conditions, perfecting her understanding of the Barrett's capabilities. All of it dismissed because she cared too much about doing her job well. "I understand your position, sir," Hannah said finally. "But I believe my results demonstrate my capability with the Barrett system." Richter closed her file and leaned back in his chair. "Results on a range, yes. But combat is different. Novak, I'm recommending you for additional psychological evaluation before any field deployment consideration. We need to ensure you can handle the pressure when lives are actually on the line." As Hannah left the colonel's office, she realized that no amount of perfect shooting would change their minds. They'd decided she was too emotional, too intense, too much of a risk. The Barrett .50 caliber would remain out of reach, assigned to shooters they deemed more stable, more reliable, more suitable for the demands of real combat. She had no way of knowing that within days, she'd get her chance to prove them all wrong. The psychological evaluation took place in a sterile white room that felt more like a medical facility than a military installation. Dr. Alina Kozlov, a Russian psychologist contracted by the Czech military, sat across from Hannah with a clipboard, and the kind of clinical detachment that made the space feel even colder. "Tell me about your relationship with perfectionism," Dr. Kozlov began, her accent adding a slight formality to the English words. Hannah had expected this line of questioning. Her file was filled with comments about her obsessive attention to detail and inability to accept anything less than perfect performance. "I believe in doing things correctly," Hannah replied carefully. "When you're responsible for equipment that can engage targets at extreme range, precision matters." Dr. Kozlov made a note. "But your colleagues describe your behavior as intense, even aggressive when things don't meet your standards. Can you give me an example of a time when you had to compromise on your perfectionist tendencies?" The question was designed to make her admit fault, to acknowledge that her standards were unrealistic or problematic. Hannah thought about the countless times she'd re-zeroed her rifle when other shooters would have accepted good enough. The hours she'd spent analyzing failed shots that others would have dismissed as acceptable misses. "Doctor," In sniper training, there's no such thing as acceptable failure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A missed shot can mean a failed mission or a dead teammate. What others call perfectionism, I call professional responsibility. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering her childhood, her motivations for military service, her response to stress and criticism. Dr. Kozlov probed for signs of instability, for evidence that Hannah's intensity masked deeper psychological issues. Your instructors report that you sometimes become visibly frustrated when other soldiers don't meet your standards, Dr. Kozlov noted. How do you think this affects team cohesion? Hannah felt the familiar burn of having her strengths reframed as weaknesses. I get frustrated when people don't take their responsibilities seriously, yes. But I've never let that interfere with mission completion or team safety. But it does interfere with team dynamics, doesn't it? Your fellow soldiers feel judged, perhaps intimidated by your expectations. The psychologist's questions revealed the real issue. It wasn't that Hannah was unstable or unfit for duty. It was that her competence made others uncomfortable. Her standards highlighted their own mediocrity, and her determination challenged their assumptions about what a young European woman could accomplish with a Barrett .50 caliber. After the evaluation, Hannah returned to her quarters feeling drained and frustrated. Her roommate, Lisa Weber, was cleaning her rifle at the small desk they shared. Lisa was Hans Weber's younger sister, also a sniper, but one who'd found acceptance in the unit by never pushing boundaries or challenging expectations. How did it go? Lisa asked without looking up from her weapon. About as well as expected, Hannah replied, dropping onto her narrow cot. They've decided I'm too emotional for the Barrett. Lisa paused in her cleaning. You know, Hannah, maybe they have a point. You do get pretty wound up about things that don't really matter. The comment stung because it came from someone Hannah had considered a friend. Things that don't matter? Lisa, we're training to be snipers. Everything matters. Every detail. Every standard, every shot. But not everyone has to be perfect all the time, Lisa replied. Sometimes good enough is actually good enough. Maybe if you relaxed a little, people would be more comfortable working with you. Hannah stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of isolation that had become her constant companion. Even Lisa, who'd seen her dedication and competence firsthand, thought the problem was Hannah's standards rather than everyone else's lack of them. That evening, she walked to the training facility's small library and pulled out technical manuals on long-range shooting. If formal training wouldn't give her access to the Barrett in combat situations, she'd make herself so technically proficient that they'd have no choice but to recognize her capabilities. She studied ballistics, tables until she could calculate trajectory adjustments in her head. She memorized environmental factors that affected bullet flight at extreme ranges. She learned to read terrain and weather conditions with the skill of someone who'd spent decades in the field rather than months. In training, the other soldiers noticed her solitary study sessions and interpreted them as further evidence of her problematic intensity. There goes Novak again, she'd hear them whisper, probably trying to memorize the entire technical manual. What they didn't understand was that knowledge was the only weapon she had left. If they wouldn't trust her with the Barrett because of who she was, maybe they'd trust her because of what she knew. Dr. Kozlov's report arrived 3 days later, delivered by Colonel Richter with the efficiency of someone completing an unpleasant but necessary task. The psychological evaluation raises concerns about your suitability for high-stress combat deployments, he informed Hannah in his office. Dr. Kozlov believes your perfectionist tendencies could compromise decision-making under pressure. Hannah felt something cold settle in her chest. What does that mean for my training, sir? It means you'll continue with the program, but you won't be certified for Barrett .50 caliber operations. You'll be assigned to standard marksman roles using conventional sniper rifles. The decision felt like a door slamming shut. All her preparation, all her exceptional performance, dismissed because a psychologist had decided her dedication was a character flaw. Hannah left Richter's office knowing that she'd been relegated to the margins, assigned to secondary roles while others received the training and opportunities she'd earned through superior performance. But she also left with a determination that burned brighter than her disappointment. If they wouldn't give her the chance to prove herself, she'd create her own opportunity. And when that moment came, they'd learn that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one you need when everything falls apart. The Barrett .50 caliber might be officially out of reach, but Hannah Novak wasn't finished proving what she could accomplish. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks after the psychological evaluation, Hannah had settled into a routine of quiet competence and careful observation. She'd been assigned to Team Bravo, a standard reconnaissance unit that operated with conventional sniper rifles rather than the Barrett systems reserved for elite marksmen. Her teammates treated her with professional courtesy, tinged with the knowledge that she'd been deemed unsuitable for the premier assignments. During morning briefings, she watched as the Barrett certified snipers received priority intelligence updates and specialized mission parameters. Team Alpha, led by Sergeant Petrov, handled the high-value targets and long-range interdiction missions that Hannah had trained for. She was relegated to overwatch duties and standard reconnaissance, roles that made use of her marksmanship skills, but kept her away from the challenging scenarios she'd prepared for. The whispers had evolved since her evaluation. Where once her colleagues had questioned her physical capability to handle the Barrett's recoil, now they spoke in hushed tones about her psychological unfitness. "Did you hear about Novak's psych eval?" she overheard Corporal Weber telling a new arrival. "Apparently she's too unstable for the heavy stuff. Something about obsessive tendencies." The distortion of facts frustrated Hannah more than outright mockery would have. Her dedication was being recast as pathology, her standards as evidence of mental instability. But she'd learned to keep her reactions controlled, knowing that any display of frustration would be interpreted as confirmation of Dr. Kozlov's assessment. During a routine equipment maintenance session, Hannah found herself working alongside Marcus Chun, a Barrett-certified sniper from Team Alpha. Chun was methodical in his work, competent but not exceptional, the kind of soldier who met standards without exceeding them. As he cleaned his Barrett M82A1, Hannah couldn't help but notice several maintenance shortcuts that would affect long-term reliability. "You might want to pay more attention to the bolt extension," Hannah said quietly, unable to watch substandard maintenance of such sophisticated equipment. "Carbon buildup in that area can affect extraction timing." Chun looked up with mild annoyance. "I've been maintaining Barretts for 3 years, Novak. I think I know what I'm doing." "Of course," Hannah replied, returning to her own rifle. But she'd seen the carbon deposits he'd missed, the inadequate lubrication of critical components, the casual approach that would cause problems under combat conditions. This was the stable soldier they'd chosen over her, someone who met minimum standards and never pushed for better. The contrast became even more apparent during advanced marksmanship training. While Hannah consistently achieved the highest scores in her team, she noticed that Team Alpha's performance was merely adequate. Petrov and his team could hit targets at the ranges required for certification, but their precision lacked the consistency that defined true expertise. During one particular exercise, she watched through binoculars as Chun attempted a 1,200-meter shot in challenging wind conditions. His first shot missed by nearly 2 feet, a massive error at that range. His second was closer, but still outside acceptable parameters. By his third attempt, he'd adjusted correctly, but the process revealed a lack of fundamental understanding about wind reading and trajectory calculation. Hannah found herself mentally calculating the corrections he should have made, seeing the environmental factors he'd missed, understanding the precise adjustments needed for first-shot accuracy. But she was positioned with Team Bravo, armed with a conventional rifle, watching the elite operators struggle with challenges she could have solved immediately. The frustration was compounded by Colonel Richter's feedback sessions. During individual evaluations, he consistently praised her technical knowledge and shooting accuracy while lamenting what he termed her integration challenges. "Your marksmanship continues to be exemplary," he told her during one session. "But leadership requires more than individual excellence, Novak. It requires the ability to work within team dynamics." "Sir, I've never had conflicts with my team members," Hannah replied. "My evaluations show consistent cooperation and support." For unit objectives, Richter consulted his notes. "Cooperation, yes, but not leadership. Your colleagues report that while you never refuse orders or fail to complete assignments, you don't inspire confidence in high-stress situations. There's a difference between following protocol and demonstrating the kind of calm authority needed for Barrett operations." The criticism felt deliberately vague, impossible to address through performance improvements. How could she demonstrate calm authority when she was never given authority to demonstrate? How could she prove her capability in high-stress situations when she was systematically excluded from high-stress assignments? That evening, Hannah sat in the facility's small rec room, studying ballistics tables while other soldiers played cards or watched television. Lisa Weber approached with a cup of coffee and the sympathetic expression Hannah had grown to dislike. "You know, Hannah, maybe this assignment is a blessing in disguise," Lisa said, settling into the adjacent chair. "Team Bravo has good people, and you won't have to deal with the pressure that comes with Barrett operations." Hannah looked up from her calculations. "The pressure is what I trained for, Lisa. It's what I'm good at. But is it worth all this stress? Look at yourself. You're studying ballistics tables during your free time. Most people would use this as an opportunity to relax, to enjoy the lighter responsibilities." Lisa's well-meaning advice highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding that surrounded Hannah's situation. Others saw her dedication as compulsive behavior that needed to be managed rather than professional excellence that should be utilized. "I study because precision matters," Hannah replied. "Because the difference between good enough and perfect can be the difference between mission success and mission failure." Lisa shook her head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Maybe that's exactly what they're worried about. Not everyone can handle that kind of pressure, Hannah. Maybe they're trying to protect you from something you're not ready for." Hannah returned to her ballistics tables, but Lisa's words echoed in her mind. The assumption that she needed protection, that the standards she set for herself were somehow unhealthy or unrealistic, had become the foundation for every decision about her career. They decided she was too intense for elite operations, too emotionally invested for critical assignments, too perfectionist for real-world applications. But Hannah knew something they didn't. She'd spent months preparing for challenges they couldn't imagine, developing skills they didn't recognize, and building knowledge they didn't value. When the moment came to prove herself, and she was certain it would come, they'd learned that sometimes intensity and perfectionism weren't character flaws. Sometimes they were exactly what saved lives. The deployment order came down on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Hannah was conducting routine equipment inspections when Colonel Richter's voice echoed across the training facility's intercom system, calling all personnel to immediate assembly. The urgency in his tone suggested this wasn't a drill. In the main briefing room, soldiers from all teams gathered with the electric tension that accompanied real-world missions. Hannah found a seat near the back, her notebook ready, though she suspected this would be another assignment where Team Bravo provided support while Team Alpha handled the primary objectives. Richter took the podium with unusual gravity. "Intelligence reports indicate a high-value target has been located in the Bohemian Forest region. APPROXIMATEL 80 kilometers southeast of our position. Viktor Reznov, a war criminal responsible for coordinating attacks against NATO supply lines, has been traced to a fortified compound in extremely challenging terrain. A digital map appeared on the briefing room's main screen, showing heavily forested mountains cut by deep valleys and rocky outcroppings. Hannah studied the topography, automatically calculating sight lines and potential firing positions from her study of similar terrain features. The compound is protected by an elite sniper team, Richter continued. Our intelligence suggests at least 4 marksmen with advanced training and equipment, positioned to cover all approaches to the target area. This is not a standard reconnaissance mission. The colonel's eyes swept across the assembled soldiers. Team Alpha will conduct the primary assault. Petrov, your Barrett team will neutralize the enemy snipers and provide overwatch for the extraction team. Hannah felt the familiar mix of disappointment and frustration as the primary assignments were distributed. Chun, Weber, and 2 other Barrett-certified operators would handle the critical long-range engagements while her team provided perimeter security and equipment support. Team Bravo, Richter announced. You'll establish a secondary observation post here, he indicated. A position on the map roughly 2 kilometers from the primary target. Your mission is to monitor escape routes and provide early warning if enemy reinforcements approach. As the briefing continued with detailed tactical planning, Hannah found herself studying the terrain with growing concern. The enemy sniper positions, marked in red on the digital display, had been placed with sophisticated understanding of the landscape. They controlled high ground with overlapping fields of fire, creating a defensive network that would be extremely difficult to penetrate. More troubling was Team Alpha's proposed approach route. Petrov's plan called for a direct advance through a valley that would expose his snipers to counterfire from multiple directions. Hannah could see at least 3 positions where enemy marksmen could engage the Barrett team before they reached effective firing positions. During the tactical discussion phase, she raised her hand tentatively. Sir, regarding Team Alpha's approach. Vector. Richter paused, looking mildly irritated at the interruption. Yes, Novak? The valley approach exposes the Barrett team to enfilade fire from the ridgeline positions. If the enemy snipers are as skilled as intelligence suggests, Team Alpha could take casualties before establishing effective counter-sniper positions. The room fell silent. Petrov's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching hostility. Novak, we've planned this operation based on extensive intelligence analysis and tactical expertise. I think we can handle our assignments without input from Team Bravo. Hannah felt heat rising in her cheeks but pressed on. I'm not questioning the overall plan, sir. I'm suggesting that an alternate approach from the eastern ridge might provide better angles of attack while reducing exposure to enemy fire. Colonel Richter consulted his map briefly, then shook his head. The eastern approach would require significantly more time and expose the team to different risks. Team Alpha's route has been chosen for good reasons, Novak. Your focus should be on your own mission parameters. The dismissal stung, but Hannah recognized a familiar pattern. Her tactical analysis, based on months of studying similar terrain, was being dismissed because it came from someone deemed unsuitable for elite operations. The fact that her observations were correct didn't matter if she lacked the credentials to have them taken seriously. As the briefing concluded and teams began their preparations, Hannah overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed her worst fears. Did you hear Novak trying to tell Alpha Team how to do their job? Weber muttered to another soldier. She can't even get certified for Barrett operations, but she wants to give tactical advice to actual snipers. Classic Novak, came the reply. Always thinks she knows better than everyone else. Good thing Richter shut that down before she confused the actual operators. The comments reinforced the narrative that had surrounded her since the psychological evaluation. Her expertise was reframed as arrogance, her legitimate concerns dismissed as evidence of poor judgment. But as Hannah prepared her equipment for the mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that Team Alpha was walking into a trap. The enemy sniper positions were too well placed, too intelligently positioned to be vulnerable to a direct assault. Whoever had planned the compound's defenses understood long-range engagement principles at an expert level. She thought about the Barrett sitting in Team Alpha's equipment cache, the weapon she'd trained extensively with but been denied access to in real operations. If her tactical analysis was correct, if Team Alpha encountered the resistance she expected, that Barrett might be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Hannah finished her equipment check and prepared for what she expected. Would be another support mission, watching from the sidelines while others handled the critical engagements. But something in the tactical situation felt wrong, and her instincts, honed by months of intensive study and preparation, were screaming warnings that no one wanted to hear. The deployment would begin at dawn. By this time tomorrow, she'd know whether her concerns were justified or whether she'd been worried about nothing. Either way, she'd be ready. The convoy departed at 0530 hours under overcast skies that promised rain before evening. Hannah sat in the second vehicle with Team Bravo, watching the Czech countryside roll past through armored windows. The heavily forested hills grew more imposing as they approached the operational area, terrain that would challenge even experienced units. Team Alpha rode in the lead vehicle, their Barrett rifles secured in custom cases, alongside specialized ammunition and targeting equipment. Hannah could see Petrov reviewing final intelligence reports, his confidence evident in his relaxed posture and casual interaction with his team members. They believed this would be a straightforward operation, a matter of superior equipment and training overwhelming less sophisticated opposition. Captain Maria Santos, Team Bravo's leader, briefed Hannah and the other team members as they traveled. Our observation post overlooks the primary escape route from the compound. Intelligence suggests any fleeing personnel will use the mountain trail that passes directly through our sector. Santos was a competent officer who'd earned respect through steady performance rather than exceptional brilliance. She treated Hannah with professional courtesy while making it clear that initiative beyond assigned parameters would not be welcome. Novak, you'll handle primary observation duties, Santos continued. Your marksmanship scores make you our best option for long-range identification and potential interdiction, if targets present themselves. Hannah nodded, though she understood the limitations built into her assignment. She'd be armed with a standard sniper rifle effective to perhaps 800 meters, while the Barrett systems could engage targets at nearly twice that range. As they approached the deployment area, Hannah studied the terrain through her binoculars. The enemy compound sat on a plateau surrounded by steep ridges, positioned to control access routes through natural choke points. The defensive positions were even more sophisticated than the intelligence briefings had suggested, with carefully constructed hides that would be nearly invisible until enemy snipers began firing. Team Alpha established their positions in the valley Hannah had warned about, approximately 1,200 meters from the enemy compound. Through her scope, she could see Petrov and his team setting up their Barrett rifles, confident in their ability to engage and eliminate the enemy snipers before the assault team moved in. Team Bravo took position on a ridge 2 kilometers southeast of the primary target, with excellent visibility of potential escape routes, but limited ability to support the main assault. Hannah set up her observation post behind a natural rock formation that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform. The first indication of trouble came at 0645 hours, when Team Alpha reported ready for engagement. Hannah watched through her spotting scope as Petrov attempted to acquire targets in the enemy positions. For several minutes there was no activity, no return fire, no indication that enemy snipers were even present. Then the world exploded into chaos. The first shot came from a position nobody had identified, a perfectly placed round that struck Chun's Barrett rifle directly in the scope, destroying the optic and sending metal fragments into his face. Before Team Alpha could react, 3 more shots rang out in rapid succession, each one finding its mark with devastating precision. Petrov dove for cover as a round shattered the rock inches from his head. Weber's spotter collapsed as a bullet found the gap in his body armor. In less than 30 seconds, Team Alpha had been reduced from an effective fighting unit to a collection of wounded and panicked soldiers, seeking whatever cover they could find. Alpha Team is taking heavy casualties. Petrov's voice crackled through the radio, his previous confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Enemy snipers are in positions we haven't identified. We need immediate support. Hannah watched in horror as the situation she'd predicted unfolded with surgical precision. The enemy marksmen weren't simply defending their compound. They were systematically destroying Team Alpha with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested elite training and superior positioning. Colonel Richter's voice cut through the radio chatter from the command post. Alpha Team, identify enemy positions and return fire. Bravo Team, what's your status? Captain Santos responded immediately. Bravo Team is in position and observing. We can see the compound area but haven't identified specific enemy locations. Hannah keyed her radio carefully. Captain, I can see muzzle flashes from at least 3 positions. The enemy snipers are using advanced camouflage in position to cover each other's blind spots. Through her scope, she'd identified firing positions that hadn't appeared on any intelligence report, locations chosen by someone who understood both the terrain and long-range engagement principles at an expert level. Alpha Team, can you confirm enemy positions reported by Bravo? Richter's voice carried growing urgency as reports of casualties continued to stream in. Petrov's response was fragmented by static and the sound of incoming fire. Negative, we're pinned down and can't establish visual contact. Enemy fire is extremely accurate. We need immediate extraction. Hannah felt her heart racing as she realized the full scope of the disaster unfolding below her. Team Alpha, equipped with the most advanced sniper rifles in the military inventory, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy force they couldn't even locate. The Barrett .50 caliber rifles, weapons she'd been deemed unfit to operate, lay unused while their assigned operators cowered behind inadequate cover. All teams were aborting the primary mission, Richter announced. Alpha Team, begin immediate withdrawal. Bravo Team, provide overwatch for extraction. But as Hannah watched the valley below, she realized that extraction might not be possible. The enemy snipers had positioned themselves to control not just the approaches to the compound, but the withdrawal routes as well. Team Alpha was trapped in a kill zone designed by someone who understood warfare at a level that NATO intelligence had seriously underestimated. The weapon Hannah had trained extensively with, the Barrett .50 caliber that could reach out and touch targets at extreme range, sat unused while soldiers died. And she was beginning to understand that before this day was over, someone would have to prove that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one you need when everything falls apart. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next hour. Team Alpha remained pinned in the valley, unable to advance or retreat without exposing themselves to devastating sniper fire. 2 soldiers were seriously wounded, including Chun, whose face had been lacerated by scope fragments. Weber had taken a round through his shoulder that left his right arm useless. Hannah monitored the radio traffic with growing frustration. Colonel Richter was coordinating with higher command for additional support, but air assets were unavailable due to weather conditions, and the nearest ground reinforcements were hours away. Meanwhile, Team Alpha was slowly being systematically eliminated by an enemy force that seemed to anticipate their every movement. Bravo Team, we need you to provide suppressive fire to cover Alpha's withdrawal. Richter's voice carried the strain of a commander watching his operation collapse. Captain Santos immediately began repositioning her team, but Hannah realized the fundamental problem with the order. "Captain," she said quietly, "our effective range doesn't reach the enemy positions. Standard rifles can't engage targets at that distance with any accuracy." Santos checked her range card and confirmed Hannah's assessment. The enemy snipers were positioned beyond the effective range of conventional weapons, protected by distance and superior equipment. Through her spotting scope, Hannah watched as Petrov attempted another movement. The moment he exposed himself to try reaching his Barrett rifle, a bullet struck the ground inches from his head. The enemy marksmen weren't just accurate. They were toying with Team Alpha, demonstrating their complete control of the engagement. "This is Alpha Leader." Petrov's voice was tight with pain and exhaustion. "We've got at least 4 enemy positions with overlapping fields of fire. They're using heavy caliber rifles, probably .50 caliber or larger. We can't reach them with our current equipment." The irony wasn't lost on Hannah. Team Alpha's Barrett rifles, the weapons that could engage at the necessary range, lay abandoned where they'd fallen when the first shots disrupted their positions. She keyed her radio carefully. "Captain Santos, I'm going to reposition for a better observation angle. I might be able to identify specific enemy locations." Santos looked up from her own spotting scope. "Negative, Novak. Your orders are to maintain overwatch of the escape route." But Hannah was already gathering her equipment. She'd spotted a rocky outcropping approximately 800 meters closer to the enemy positions, still within her assigned sector, but offering angles that might allow her to provide useful intelligence. More importantly, it would put her within range of at least some enemy positions if the opportunity for engagement presented itself. "I'll still have visibility of the escape route," she explained, shouldering her rifle, "but from a position where I can actually contribute to Alpha Team's survival." Santos hesitated, clearly torn between following protocol and adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. "Stay in radio contact," she finally said, "and don't engage without direct orders." Hannah moved through the forest with skills developed during months of training that others had dismissed as excessive preparation. She navigated terrain features, used natural concealment, and approached her new position without detection. The rocky outcropping provided excellent cover and clear sight lines toward the enemy compound. From her new position, she could see details that hadn't been visible from Team Bravo's original location. The enemy snipers were indeed using advanced equipment, with at least 3 positions equipped with what appeared to be .50 caliber rifles. More concerning, they were repositioning between shots, moving through prepared positions in a coordinated pattern that suggested sophisticated training. "Alpha Team, this is Novak from Forward Observation," she radioed. "I have visual on enemy positions. Primary sniper at grid 387,245. Secondary at 387,250. Third position at 387,235. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle brake of a Barrett rifle in the primary position, operated by someone who understood long-range engagement principles better than most NATO-trained snipers. "Copy, Forward Observation," Petrov responded. "Can you engage?" Hannah checked her range to the primary target. Nearly 1,100 meters with significant wind deflection, at the absolute limit of her rifle's effective range. With perfect conditions and exceptional luck, she might be able to make the shot. But conditions weren't perfect, and the target was partially concealed behind prepared fortifications. "Negative engagement," she replied. "Range is beyond effective parameters for current equipment." But even as she spoke, Hannah was calculating wind deflection and trajectory drop. The shot was possible, barely, if she could account for all variables correctly. The problem was that missing would reveal her position and likely result in immediate retaliation from marksmen with superior equipment. Through her radio, She heard Colonel Richter coordinating evacuation procedures. All teams were initiating emergency extraction. Alpha team will be recovered by helicopter as soon as weather permits. But Hannah could see what Richter couldn't. The enemy snipers were already repositioning to cover potential landing zones. Any helicopter attempting extraction would be vulnerable to the same precise fire that had devastated Team Alpha. She watched as one of the enemy marksmen shifted to a new position that would provide clear shots at aircraft approaching the valley. The sniper moved with professional efficiency, someone comfortable with advanced equipment and complex tactical situations. As he settled into his new hide, Hannah caught a glimpse of his rifle through her scope dot. It was a Barrett M82A1, identical to the weapons Team Alpha had been forced to abandon. The same rifle she'd trained extensively with, the weapon she'd been deemed psychologically unfit to operate in combat. The enemy was using her equipment against her fellow soldiers, and she was the only person in position to do anything about it. Hannah settled behind her rifle and began her final calculations. The shot was at extreme range, complicated by wind and elevation differences, requiring precision that would challenge even Barrett-equipped snipers. But she'd spent months preparing for exactly this kind of challenge, studying ballistics and environmental factors that others considered excessive. The time for being underestimated was about to end. Hannah steadied her breathing and began the mental calculations that would determine whether Team Alpha lived or died. Wind speed at her position was approximately 8 miles per hour from the southwest, but the valley created unpredictable air currents that could deflect her bullet by several feet at extreme range. Temperature was 62 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity roughly 70%, all factors that would affect bullet trajectory over the 1,100 meters to her target. Through her scope, she studied the enemy sniper in the primary position. He was well concealed behind prepared fortifications, with only a small portion of his upper torso visible when he adjusted position to track Team Alpha's movements. The shot would require threading her bullet through a gap in the rocks barely 18 inches wide, then striking a target roughly the size of a dinner plate. Her rifle, a standard 7.62 mm sniper system, wasn't designed for engagements at this range. While capable of accuracy to 800 meters in ideal conditions, attempting a precision shot at 1,100 meters pushed the weapon beyond its intended parameters. The bullet would drop nearly 40 feet during its flight time, requiring Hannah to aim at a point in empty sky above the target and trust her calculations completely. Alpha Team, what's your status? Colonel Richter's voice cut through the radio chatter, seeking updates from a unit that was rapidly running out of options. Petrov's response was fragmented by static and the sound of incoming fire. Still pinned down. Enemy has us bracketed from multiple positions. We can't move without taking casualties. Hannah adjusted her scope's elevation turret, dialing in the correction she'd calculated for extreme range engagement. The numbers felt impossible. 39.5 minutes of angle elevation, 4.2 minutes right windage adjustments that would have seemed ridiculous during training exercises. But months of studying ballistics tables and environmental factors had prepared her for exactly this situation. Through her earpiece, she heard Captain Santos coordinating with Team Bravo's other members. Johnson, Miller, maintain observation of the escape route. Rodriguez, monitor radio traffic from command. Santos was following protocol, keeping her team focused on their assigned mission, while Team Alpha faced annihilation in the valley below. Hannah keyed her radio, keeping her voice low to avoid detection. Captain Santos, I have a possible shot on the primary sniper position. The response was immediate and sharp. Negative, Novak. Your orders are observation only. Do not engage without authorization. But authorization would take time they didn't have. Hannah could see Team Alpha's situation deteriorating by the minute. Weber was losing blood from his shoulder wound, and Chun's vision was compromised by facial lacerations. Petrov was trying to coordinate movement while pinned behind cover that wouldn't protect them much longer. The enemy snipers, meanwhile, were demonstrating tactical sophistication that exceeded intelligence estimates. They moved between prepared positions, coordinated their fire to maintain constant pressure, and showed the kind of patience that came from professional training. This wasn't a militia or irregular force. These were elite marksmen who understood their craft at an expert level. Hannah made her decision. She switched her radio to a frequency that would reach Team Alpha directly, bypassing Captain Santos and the command structure that had consistently underestimated her capabilities. Alpha. Team, this is forward observation. I'm in position to engage the primary sniper. Recommend you prepare to move on my signal. Forward observation. This is Alpha Leader. Petrov responded, his voice tight with pain and exhaustion. You're not authorized for engagement. Maintain observation only. The response didn't surprise Hannah. Even facing death, military protocol demanded adherence to established chains of command and predetermined assignments. Alpha Leader, the primary sniper is using your Barrett rifle, Hannah replied, watching through her scope as the enemy marksman settled into a new firing position. He's repositioning to cover potential helicopter landing zones. Any extraction attempt will result in additional casualties. She could hear Petrov conferring with his remaining team members, weighing impossible options. Stay in position and face systematic elimination or attempt movement that would expose them to devastating fire from multiple directions. Through her scope, Hannah watched the enemy sniper make final adjustments to his Barrett rifle, preparing for what would likely be a killing shot. All teams, be advised that weather conditions have improved sufficiently for helicopter extraction. Colonel Richter announced. Extraction bird will be on station in 15 minutes. Alpha Team, prepare for immediate evacuation from Landing Zone Charlie. Hannah felt her heart rate spike. Landing Zone Charlie was directly in the enemy sniper's field of fire. The Barrett rifle he was using could engage helicopter targets at over a mile, turning the extraction attempt into a death trap for both the rescue crew and Team Alpha. She adjusted her rifle's position fractionally, ensuring perfect stability for the shot that would either save her teammates or reveal her position to enemy marksmen with superior equipment. The gap in the rocks that framed her target seemed impossibly small, the distance impossibly far, the variables affecting bullet flight impossibly complex. But Hannah had spent months preparing for impossible shots, studying scenarios that others dismissed as unrealistic, developing skills that were considered excessive for her assigned role. Her emotional intensity had driven her to understand ballistics principles that most snipers never bothered to learn. Her perfectionist tendencies had prepared her for precision requirements that would challenge Olympic marksmen. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper make final preparations. In approximately 12 minutes, a helicopter would approach Landing Zone Charlie, carrying rescue personnel who had no idea they were flying into an expertly planned ambush. Team Alpha would attempt to reach the landing zone, exposing themselves to coordinated fire from multiple positions. Hannah settled her crosshairs on the tiny gap in the rocks, held her breath, and began the final phase of calculations that would determine whether her months of preparation had been worth the mockery and dismissal she'd endured. The shot was at the absolute limit of possibility, requiring precision that would test every skill she'd developed, but sometimes impossible was exactly what the situation required. Hannah's finger rested on the trigger as she made her final calculations. The enemy sniper had settled into his position behind the Barrett rifle, his scope trained on the valley where Team Alpha lay pinned. Through her own scope, she could see him making minute adjustments to his weapon, preparing for shots that would determine the outcome of the entire operation. The physics of her situation were brutal. Her bullet would travel for approximately 1.8 seconds, during which time wind Deflection, gravity, and atmospheric conditions would all conspire to push it off target. At 1,100 meters, even a slight miscalculation would result in a miss by several feet, revealing her position and likely resulting in immediate retaliation. She adjusted her breathing pattern, settling into the rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times during training. 4 counts in, hold for 6, 4 counts out, then the natural respiratory pause where her body was most stable. It was during this pause that she would take the shot, at the moment when her heart rate was lowest and her muscles most relaxed. Through her earpiece, she could hear helicopter rotors approaching from the east. The extraction bird was arriving ahead of schedule, probably due to improving weather conditions. In approximately 8 minutes, it would reach landing zone Charlie, where Team Alpha was supposed to rendezvous for evacuation. Alpha Team, extraction. Bird is inbound. Colonel Richter's voice carried relief and urgency. Move to landing zone Charlie immediately. You have a narrow window for evacuation. Hannah watched through her scope as Petrov began coordinating movement with his remaining team members. They would have to cross nearly 200 meters of open ground to reach the landing zone, terrain that the enemy snipers had undoubtedly prepared to cover. The primary sniper shifted position slightly, adjusting his Barrett rifle to track the helicopter's approach route. Hannah could see his finger on the trigger, waiting for the aircraft to enter his engagement zone. The Barrett's .50 caliber rounds could disable a helicopter with a single well-placed shot, turning the rescue mission into a catastrophe. Hannah made her final sight adjustments and settled into her shooting position. The crosshairs wavered slightly in the gap between rocks, the natural tremor that affected all shooters at extreme range. She controlled her breathing, forcing her heart rate down through techniques developed during months of precision training that others had dismissed as excessive. Forward observation. This is Alpha Leader. Petrov's voice was tight with determination. We're beginning movement to the extraction point. If you have any ability to provide suppressive fire, now would be the time. The request was technically outside Hannah's authorization, but it also represented the first time anyone had asked for her tactical input rather than dismissing it. Hannah keyed her radio for what she knew might be the last time. Alpha Team, I'm engaging the primary sniper. Move on my shot. She switched off her radio to avoid distracting commands from Captain Santos or Colonel Richter. This decision was hers alone, based on calculations and preparations that no one else could understand or evaluate. The enemy sniper made a final adjustment to his scope, tracking the helicopter's approach with professional precision. Hannah could see him preparing to fire, his body language indicating the confidence of someone who had never missed a critical shot. In approximately 30 seconds, he would engage the rescue helicopter, probably destroying it and killing everyone aboard. Hannah settled her crosshairs on the tiny portion of the sniper's torso visible through the gap in the rocks. The target was barely 8 inches wide, partially obscured by shadows and camouflage. At 1,100 meters, hitting such a small target would challenge even Barrett-equipped marksmen using advanced optics and specialized ammunition. She began her breathing cycle, feeling her heart rate slow as her body prepared for the shot. 4 counts. In, analyzing wind conditions and atmospheric pressure. Hold for 6, making microscopic adjustments to her aim point. 4 counts out, releasing tension from muscles that had been locked in position for the past several minutes. The natural respiratory pause arrived like a moment of perfect stillness. Hannah's crosshairs steadied on the target. Her trigger finger applied the precise amount of pressure she'd practiced countless times. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil absorbed by her body position and the stable shooting platform she'd constructed. The bullet began its 1.8-second journey across the valley, following a trajectory that Hannah had calculated with precision that bordered on the obsessive. During its flight, the small piece of metal would drop nearly 40 feet, deflect approximately 18 inches due to wind conditions, and lose roughly 60% of its initial velocity. Through her scope, Hannah watched the enemy sniper continue his preparations, unaware that death was traveling toward him at 2,400 feet per second. The helicopter approached from the east, its crew having no idea they were flying into a carefully planned ambush. Team Alpha began their movement toward the landing zone, exposing themselves to enemy fire in a desperate attempt to reach safety. For 1.8 seconds, the outcome of the entire operation hung in the balance, determined by calculations made by someone who had been deemed too emotional, too intense, too perfectionist for elite operations. Hannah held her scope steady, watching to see whether months of preparation and years of training would prove sufficient for a shot that everyone had. Side was impossible. The bullet reached its target. The impact was instant and devastating. Hannah's bullet struck the enemy sniper center mass, the 7.62 millimeters round punching through his torso, with sufficient energy to knock him backward away from his Barrett rifle. Through her scope, she watched him collapse behind his prepared position, his weapon falling silent permanently. The effect on the battlefield was immediate. Team Alpha, which had been preparing for a desperate sprint across open ground, suddenly found themselves free from the devastating fire that had pinned them for hours. The primary sniper position, which had controlled access to the landing zone, was now unmanned and silent. What the hell was that? Petrov's voice crackled through the radio, confusion evident as he processed the sudden change in their tactical situation. Did anyone see where that shot came from? Hannah keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Alpha Team, primary sniper is down. Move to the landing zone immediately. But the engagement was far from over. The remaining enemy snipers, shocked by the sudden elimination of their team leader, began repositioning to counter this unexpected threat. Hannah could see movement in the secondary positions as they attempted to locate the source of the shot that had disrupted their carefully planned ambush. Through her scope, SG tracked the second sniper as he moved between prepared positions. Unlike the primary marksman, this one was being more cautious, using covered routes and limiting his exposure. But Hannah had studied the terrain extensively, knew the likely routes between positions, and could predict where he would need to expose himself. The helicopter approached landing zone Charlie, its pilot unaware that he'd been seconds away from flying into a Barrett rifle's crosshairs. Hannah watched as Team Alpha began their movement toward the extraction point, no longer pinned by the devastating fire that had trapped them in the valley. The second enemy sniper appeared briefly in Hannah's scope, moving between rocks approximately 950 meters away. The range was still extreme for her rifle, but more manageable than her first shot. She adjusted her aim point, accounting for the different distance and slightly altered wind conditions. Her second shot rang out across the valley. Just as the enemy sniper was settling into his new position, the bullet struck the rocks inches from his head, close enough to shower him with stone fragments, but not close enough for a direct hit. The near miss forced him to seek deeper cover, disrupting his ability to engage Team Alpha during their vulnerable movement. Outstanding shooting, forward observation. Petrov's voice carried a mixture of relief and amazement. Keep them suppressed while we reach the landing zone. Hannah was already tracking the third sniper position, where she could see movement indicating another marksman attempting to engage the helicopter. This shot would be even more challenging. The third position was nearly 1,200 meters away, at the absolute limit of her rifle's effective range. The target was well concealed and presenting only brief opportunities for engagement as he moved between cover positions. Hannah settled behind her rifle and began the calculations for what might be her most difficult shot yet. Wind conditions had shifted slightly, requiring new adjustments to her scope settings. The extreme range meant her bullet would drop nearly 50 feet during its flight, requiring her to aim at a point well above the target. Through her radio, she could hear the helicopter pilot coordinating with Team Alpha for extraction. "Alpha Team, I have you in sight. Prepare for immediate pickup." The aircraft was now directly over landing zone Charlie, its rotors kicking up dust that would provide additional concealment for the evacuation. Hannah watched the third enemy sniper attempt to line up a shot on the helicopter, his rifle barrel briefly visible through her scope. She adjusted her aim point fractionally, accounting for the target's movement and the extreme range. The shot would require perfect timing, perfect calculation, and perfect execution. Her third shot broke cleanly, the bullet beginning its long arc across the valley toward a target that was barely visible even through her high-powered scope. She watched through her optics as the round struck the rocks near the enemy position, close enough to force the sniper to abandon his attempt to engage the helicopter. "Alpha Team is secure in boarding," came the pilot's voice. "Extraction successful." Hannah felt a wave of relief as she watched Team Alpha reach safety. Weber was helped aboard by his teammates, his shoulder wound requiring immediate medical attention. Chun, despite his facial injuries, was mobile and alert, but the mission wasn't complete. Hannah could see the fourth enemy sniper attempting to flank her position, moving through terrain features to get within range of her location. Her shooting had revealed her position, and now she faced counterattack from marksmen with equipment superior to her own. She began packing her gear, knowing that staying in one location too long would result in her own elimination. The rocky outcropping that had provided excellent concealment for long range shooting would become a trap if enemy forces could surround it. "Forward observation, this is Alpha Leader." Petrov's voice carried a new tone of respect. "Outstanding performance. How copy?" Hannah shouldered her rifle and began moving toward her extraction route. "Copy, Alpha Leader. Primary threat eliminated. Secondary threats suppressed. Mission accomplished." As she moved through the forest, Hannah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Barrett rifle that she'd been deemed unfit to operate lay abandoned in the enemy position, its operator eliminated by someone using inferior equipment and excessive preparation. Sometimes, being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage of all. Hannah moved through the forest with the tactical awareness that came from months of training others had dismissed as unnecessary. Behind her, she could hear the remaining enemy snipers attempting to coordinate pursuit, their communications equipment crackling with frustrated exchanges in a language she didn't recognize but whose tone was unmistakable. The fourth enemy sniper was working his way toward her last known position, moving with the methodical precision of someone who understood forest warfare. But Hannah had planned for this contingency, had studied potential escape routes during her initial reconnaissance of the area. Her obsessive preparation was once again proving to be the difference between survival and capture. She reached a predetermined waypoint and paused to check her radio. Team Alpha's extraction had been successful, with the helicopter already en route to the base medical facility. Weber and Chun would receive proper treatment for their injuries, and the mission's primary objective had been achieved despite the catastrophic failure of the original plan. "Bravo Team, report status." Colonel Richter's voice cut through the static. Captain Santos responded immediately. "Bravo Team is secure and maintaining observation. No enemy movement detected in our sector." Hannah realized that her unauthorized movement to engage the enemy snipers had gone unnoticed by her immediate chain of command. She keyed her radio carefully. "Captain Santos, this is Novak. I'm returning to the team position. Encountered enemy activity during forward reconnaissance." The statement was technically accurate while avoiding details that would immediately result in disciplinary action. "Copy, Novak. Return immediately and report." Santos's tone carried suspicion but not yet alarm. Hannah had perhaps 30 minutes before her absence would be thoroughly investigated. 30 minutes to reach Team Bravo's position and provide a version of events that wouldn't result in immediate court-martial. But first, she had to avoid the enemy sniper who was still hunting for her. Through her scope, she could see him moving through terrain approximately 400 meters behind her position, following tracks and sign that would eventually lead him to her location. The man was skilled, probably special forces trained, and armed, with equipment that could engage her at ranges where she couldn't effectively return fire. Hannah reached a stream that would provide both concealment and a way to break her trail. The water was cold and fast-moving, fed by mountain snowmelt that would mask her scent and wash away footprints. She waded upstream for nearly 200 meters before emerging on the opposite bank, buying precious time and distance from her new position. She could observe the enemy sniper's approach route without being detected. He reached the stream approximately 10 minutes later, studied the banks for signs of her passage, then made the tactical error of assuming she'd crossed at the most obvious point. Hannah watched through her scope as he waited, across the stream 150 meters downstream from where she'd actually crossed. The mistake gave her the opportunity she needed to break contact completely, disappearing into terrain that she'd memorized during weeks of preparation that others had dismissed as excessive. 20 minutes later, she reached Team Bravo's position to find Captain Santos and the other team members monitoring radio traffic from the main engagement. Santos looked up as Hannah approached, her expression mixing relief with suspicion. "Where have you been, Novak? You've been out of contact for over an hour." Hannah set down her equipment and began the careful process of explaining her actions, without revealing the full extent of her unauthorized engagement. "I moved to an advanced observation post to get better intelligence on enemy positions," she began. "During reconnaissance, I observed Team Alpha's engagement and provided what support I could with available equipment." Santos studied her for a long moment. "What kind of support?" "Long-range observation and occasional suppressive fire when enemy snipers expose themselves," Hannah replied. "Nothing beyond the scope of my training and equipment capabilities." The explanation was carefully crafted to minimize the apparent scope of her actions while acknowledging enough activity to account for witness reports. Before Santos could ask more detailed questions, Colonel Richter's voice crackled through the radio. "All teams, mission is complete. Begin withdrawal to extraction coordinates immediately. Outstanding work, people." The evacuation order provided Hannah with temporary protection from further interrogation, though she knew more detailed debriefing would be inevitable. During the convoy ride back to base, Hannah sat quietly while other soldiers discussed the mission's unexpected outcome. Team Alpha's near-catastrophic failure had somehow been transformed into a successful operation, though the details of how the enemy snipers had been neutralized remained unclear to most participants. Did anyone figure out where those counter-sniper shots came from? Weber asked from his stretcher, his shoulder bandaged and his arm in a sling. "Whoever was shooting saved our lives." Petrov, sitting nearby with his own collection of minor wounds, shook his head. "Intelligence is still analyzing. The engagement could have been another NATO unit in the area, or maybe local resistance fighters." Hannah listened to the speculation while watching the Czech countryside roll past through armored windows. In a few hours, she'd face detailed questioning about her actions during the mission. Her unauthorized movement, her decision to engage enemy targets, her failure to follow direct orders would all be scrutinized by officers who had already decided she was unsuitable for elite operations. But Team Alpha was alive. The mission had been successful, and the Barrett rifles that she'd been deemed unfit to operate were no longer in enemy hands. Sometimes proving your worth required breaking the rules that others used to define your limitations. The convoy approached the base perimeter, where medical personnel waited to treat the wounded and intelligence officers prepared to debrief the survivors. Hannah checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was properly secured for what would certainly be an intensive investigation. She'd taken down an entire Enemy sniper team with weapons others considered inadequate, using skills they'd dismissed as excessive, proving capabilities they'd refused to acknowledge. Now she'd face the consequences of succeeding where the system had expected her to fail, but that was a battle for another day. The debriefing began at 0800 hours, the following morning in the same conference room where Hannah had first been deemed unsuitable for Barrett operations. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. Colonel Richter sat at the head of the table, flanked by intelligence officers and senior staff, whose expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed amazement. Hannah stood at attention, while Richter reviewed mission reports that painted a picture dramatically different from what anyone had expected. Team Alpha, equipped with the most advanced sniper rifles available, had been systematically defeated by enemy marksmen until mysterious counter-sniper fire had turned the tide of engagement. Specialist Novak, Richter began, his tone carefully neutral. Your mission report indicates that you left your assigned position to conduct forward reconnaissance. Explain your reasoning for this decision. Hannah had spent most of the night preparing for this moment, crafting responses that acknowledged her actions without revealing their full scope. Sir, Team Alpha was taking heavy casualties from enemy positions that weren't visible from our original observation post. I moved to an advanced position to gather intelligence that might assist in their extraction. The explanation was technically accurate while omitting details about her unauthorized engagement of enemy targets. Major Elena Vasquez, the intelligence officer who had been analyzing the engagement, leaned forward with intense interest. During your reconnaissance, did you observe the elimination of enemy snipers? Hannah felt her heart rate increase slightly. Yes, ma'am. I observed several enemy positions being neutralized by precision fire from an unknown source. Unknown source? Richter's eyebrows rose. You were in an advanced observation position with high-powered optics, but you couldn't identify where the counter-sniper fire originated? The question was clearly designed to test whether Hannah would admit to her unauthorized shooting or maintain the fiction that another unit had been responsible. Sir, the terrain was complex and the engagement occurred at extreme range. I focused on observing enemy positions and Team Alpha's status rather than attempting to locate friendly marksmen. Hannah's response was carefully crafted to avoid direct lies while protecting herself from immediate disciplinary action. Dr. Kozlov, who had been sitting quietly during the initial questioning, spoke for the first time. Specialist Novak, how did you feel emotionally during the engagement? Did you experience the kind of intense pressure that we discussed during your psychological evaluation? The question was clearly designed to explore whether Hannah had demonstrated the emotional instability that had been predicted. I felt focused on mission completion and concern for Team Alpha's safety, Hannah replied. The situation required clear thinking and precise action, which I was able to maintain throughout the engagement. She noticed several officers exchanging glances, perhaps recognizing that her performance under extreme stress contradicted the psychological profile that had kept her from Barrett certification. Captain Santos, who had been called to provide testimony about Team Bravo's activities, offered her assessment of Hannah's behavior. Specialist Novak demonstrated initiative and tactical awareness during the mission. Her forward reconnaissance provided valuable intelligence about enemy positions. The endorsement was lukewarm but supportive, acknowledging Hannah's contributions. Without explicitly endorsing her unauthorized actions, Major Vasquez consulted her intelligence reports before asking the question that Hannah had been dreading. Analysis of the engagement indicates that enemy snipers were eliminated by precision fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The accuracy required for such shots would challenge even Barrett-equipped marksmen. Do you have any insights into how such precision might have been achieved? Hannah felt the weight of multiple gazes as she formulated her response. Ma'am, extreme-range precision shooting requires extensive knowledge of ballistics, environmental factors, and target analysis. Someone with sufficient training and preparation could potentially achieve such accuracy even with standard equipment. The answer acknowledged the technical possibility while avoiding personal claims. Someone with sufficient training, Richter repeated slowly. Are you suggesting that a sniper using conventional equipment could outperform Barrett-certified operators in extreme range engagements? The question carried implications that extended far beyond Hannah's individual situation, challenging fundamental assumptions about equipment requirements and personnel selection. Sir, I believe that knowledge, preparation, and dedication can often overcome equipment disadvantages, Hannah replied. The most advanced rifle in the world is only as effective as the person operating it. Her response was diplomatic, but carried an unmistakable message about competence versus credentials. Dr. Kozlov made notes while asking her follow-up question. During your psychological evaluation, we discussed concerns about your perfectionist tendencies and emotional intensity. Did these characteristics affect your performance during the mission? Hannah recognized this as an opportunity to reframe the qualities that had been used to limit her opportunities. Dr. Kozlov, my attention to detail and commitment to excellence helped me maintain focus during an extremely challenging situation. What others might call intensity, I consider professional dedication. The response directly challenged the psychological assessment that had kept her from advanced assignments. Colonel, Richter studied Hannah for a long moment before consulting the thick file that contained her complete service record. Specialist Novak, your marksmanship scores have consistently exceeded standards for Barrett certification. Your technical knowledge is exceptional, and your performance under pressure appears to contradict previous psychological assessments. Hannah felt a flutter of hope as Richter's tone shifted from interrogation to evaluation. However, he continued, your decision to leave your assigned position and conduct unauthorized reconnaissance represents a serious breach of military discipline. Such actions, regardless of their outcome, cannot be overlooked. The familiar weight of disappointment settled on Hannah's shoulders. Even when her unauthorized actions had saved lives and ensured mission success, the focus remained on her failure to follow orders rather than her exceptional performance under extreme conditions. That said, Richter added, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect, the results speak for themselves. Team Alpha survived a catastrophic engagement. The mission was completed successfully, and enemy threats were neutralized with precision that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Hannah waited for the verdict that would determine whether her moment of proving herself would lead to recognition or punishment. Colonel Richter closed Hannah's file and leaned back in his chair, his weathered face reflecting the internal debate that had been raging since the mission reports arrived. Around the conference table, intelligence officers and senior staff waited for a decision that would set precedent for how the military handled soldiers who succeeded by breaking established protocols. Specialist Novak, Richter began, his tone carrying the weight of command. Your actions during the mission represent both exceptional performance and serious insubordination. The question before this board is whether the results justify the methods. Hannah stood at attention, knowing that her military career hung in the balance. The next few minutes would determine whether she'd be court-martialed for disobeying orders or recognized for saving her fellow soldiers' lives. Major Vasquez spoke first, consulting the intelligence analysis that had been completed overnight. Colonel, the enemy marksmen eliminated during the engagement were identified as members of an elite sniper team trained in advanced counter-reconnaissance techniques. Their elimination required precision shooting that challenges our understanding of what's possible with standard equipment. Dr. Kozlov added her psychological perspective. From a behavioral standpoint, Specialist Novak's performance under extreme stress contradicts the concerns raised during her evaluation. Rather than emotional instability, she demonstrated exceptional focus and decision-making capability. The Admission represented a significant reversal of the psychological assessment that had kept Hannah from Barrett certification. Captain Santos, who had initially been skeptical of Hannah's unauthorized actions, offered her operational perspective. Sir, regardless of protocol violations, Specialist Novak's actions directly contributed to mission success and the survival of Team Alpha. Her tactical awareness and initiative proved decisive in a critical situation. Hannah listened to the discussion while maintaining military bearing, but internally she felt the familiar frustration of having her capabilities debated by others rather than evaluated through direct performance. The same officers who had dismissed her as too emotional were now analyzing whether her emotions had been appropriately controlled during combat. Richter stood and walked to the large map, displaying the area of operations. The tactical situation was complex, he said, tracing the positions where enemy snipers had been located. Team Alpha, equipped with Barrett rifles and advanced training, was systematically defeated by opposition forces. Yet somehow, precision counterfire from an unknown source turned the engagement decisively in our favor. He turned to face Hannah directly. Specialist, I'm going to ask you one direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Did you engage enemy targets during your unauthorized reconnaissance mission? The moment Hannah had been preparing for had arrived. She could continue the fiction that unknown marksmen had been responsible, protecting herself from certain disciplinary action. Or she could acknowledge her role in saving Team Alpha, accepting the consequences that would inevitably follow. Yes, sir, Hannah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was admitting. I engaged and eliminated enemy snipers who were preventing Team Alpha's extraction. The confession sent murmurs through the assembled officers. Several exchanged glances that mixed surprise with something approaching admiration. At what range? Richter asked. The primary target was eliminated at approximately 1,100 meters using standard 7.62 mm equipment, Hannah replied. Secondary and tertiary targets were engaged at ranges between 950 and 1,200 meters. The specifications drew visible reactions from the assembled officers, who understood the technical difficulty of achieving such precision. Major Vasquez consulted her ballistics analysis. Specialist computer modeling suggests that shots at those ranges under the environmental conditions present would have less than a 15% probability of success, even for Barrett-equipped marksmen. How do you explain your accuracy? Hannah had anticipated this question during her sleepless night of preparation. Ma'am, I spent months studying ballistics tables, environmental factors, and trajectory calculations that others considered excessive. When the situation required extreme range precision, I was prepared. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement settled. Hannah's obsessive preparation, her perfectionist tendencies, her emotional intensity about technical details had enabled her to achieve what Barrett-certified operators with superior equipment could not. Dr. Kozlov spoke into the silence. Specialist Novak, during our evaluation sessions, you consistently maintained that your standards and preparation were appropriate for your responsibilities. It appears that your self-assessment was more accurate than our professional evaluation. The admission represented a fundamental acknowledgement that the psychological profile used to limit Hannah's opportunities had been flawed. Colonel Richter returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. Specialist Novak, you've admitted to violating direct orders, leaving your assigned position without authorization, and engaging enemy targets outside your mission parameters. Hannah felt her heart sink as the familiar litany of military infractions was recited. However, Richter continued, you've also demonstrated capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections for personnel in your classification. Your actions saved the lives of multiple soldiers and ensured mission success when conventional approaches had failed catastrophically. He paused, studying Hannah with eyes that seemed to be re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about her capabilities. The question now is what we do with a soldier who succeeds by refusing to accept the limitations others have placed on her performance. Hannah waited for the verdict that would determine whether breaking the rules to save lives would be rewarded or punished, whether her moment of proving herself would lead to recognition or retribution. 7 months later, Hannah stood in the same training facility where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The Barrett M82A1 in her hands no longer felt oversized or unwieldy. It felt like the precision instrument she'd always known it to be. Around her, a new class of sniper candidates watched with the mixture of skepticism and curiosity that she remembered all too well. The key to extreme-range precision shooting, Hannah explained to the assembled trainees, isn't just equipment or natural talent. It's preparation, understanding, and the willingness to master every variable that affects bullet flight. Her instructor's patch carried new significance, representing not just technical competence, but proven performance under the most demanding conditions. Colonel Richter had made his decision that day in the conference room with characteristic directness. Rather than court-martial or commendation, he'd chosen transformation. Hannah's unauthorized actions had revealed fundamental flaws in both personnel evaluation and tactical doctrine, problems that required systematic correction rather than individual punishment. Specialist Novak, he'd announced after the long silence, you're being transferred to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Division, where your unconventional approaches can be properly utilized. The assignment had come with Barrett certification, instructor qualifications, and most importantly, the recognition that her excessive preparation had been exactly what the situation required. Now, watching her students struggle with ballistics calculations she'd mastered months earlier, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The psychological evaluation that had branded her emotionally unstable had been quietly revised. Dr. Kozlov acknowledging that intensity and perfectionism could be assets rather than liabilities when properly channeled. Instructor Novak called out one of her students, a young German corporal named Friedrich Weberhans, Weber's younger brother, who'd specifically requested assignment to her program. How do you calculate wind deflection at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters when atmospheric conditions are changing? Hannah smiled, remembering when she'd asked similar questions, only to be told they were beyond her scope of responsibility. Corporal Weber, precision shooting at extreme range requires understanding environmental factors that most people consider excessive detail. Let me show you. As she worked through the complex calculations on the whiteboard, Hannah noticed the expressions of her students shifting from skepticism to genuine interest. These were soldiers who'd been told that such precision was impossible with standard equipment, who'd been taught that Barrett rifles were necessary for extreme-range engagements. The weapon is important, Hannah continued, but knowledge and preparation are what determine success. The most advanced rifle in the world can't compensate for inadequate understanding of ballistics fundamentals. Her teaching philosophy reflected hard-won experience about the difference between equipment and expertise. After the class, Hannah walked across the facility to visit Team Alpha, which had recently returned from another deployment. Petrov, now fully recovered from his injuries, greeted her with the respect that had been notably absent during their early interactions. Instructor Novak, he said, using her new title with evident satisfaction. I heard you've got a new group of students. Are you teaching them the impossible shots you pulled off during our extraction? Hannah appreciated the acknowledgement, though she noted how the story had evolved over time. Her unauthorized engagement had become legend, the details growing more impressive with each retelling. I'm teaching them that impossible is often just another word for unprepared, she replied. The same principles that work at 800 meters work at 1,200 meters, if you understand the science behind them. Weber, his shoulder fully healed and his confidence restored, joined the conversation. "I still can't believe you took down that primary sniper with a standard rifle. The intelligence reports said he was using our own Barrett against us." Hannah remembered the moment when her bullet had found its target, eliminating the enemy marksman who'd been systematically destroying Team Alpha with their own equipment. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one you need when everything falls apart, she said. As evening approached, Hannah returned to her quarters and found a letter waiting from her sister in Germany. The family had followed her military career with pride, though they'd never fully understood the challenges she'd faced in proving herself. The letter contained newspaper clippings about a heroic female sniper whose actions had saved an entire team, stories that bore little resemblance to the complex reality of military politics and professional recognition. Hannah settled at her desk and began preparing lesson plans for the following day's instruction. Tomorrow, she'd teach another group of soldiers about precision shooting, environmental factors, and the importance of preparation. Some would listen with genuine interest. Others would dismiss her methods as excessive until they needed them. But that was the nature of proving yourself in any field. The very qualities that others criticized as character flaws, intensity, perfectionism, unwillingness to accept limitations, often became the foundation for exceptional performance when circumstances demanded excellence. Hannah looked out at the Czech mountains where she'd once climbed alone to prove what she could accomplish. Now she was helping others discover their own capabilities, teaching them that sometimes the most important victories come from refusing to accept the limitations others place on your potential. The Barrett rifle, leaning against her wall, no longer represented equipment she'd been denied access to. It represented recognition earned, capabilities proven, and assumptions shattered by someone who'd been told she was too emotional, too intense, too much of a liability for elite operations. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage of all. And sometimes proving everyone wrong was exactly what the mission required. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.